Hey everyone, and welcome to Nat Chat. I'm Nat Eliason, and as you probably know, we're currently exploring what to do as a student or recent graduate trying to succeed outside of the traditional, somewhat broken college system. In this episode, I'm joined by Thomas Frank. Thomas was one of the people I really wanted to have on since the beginning. While he was a student, he started a site called College Info Geek, which has become the most popular blog on practical tips for college students, whether they want to do better in school or go out and learn on their own. Since then, he's also started a popular podcast and YouTube channel, and we dig into the whole evolution of that during the episode. We also talked a lot about traveling post-grad, figuring out what kind of work excites you, learning on your own, how Thomas paid off $15,000 of student debt before graduating, how he taught himself design to get started in the internet work world, and a lot more. Definitely check out Thomas on YouTube at collegeinfogeek.com and on the College Info Geek podcast after the episode. We had a lot of fun and his content is fantastic. And with that, let's welcome Thomas to the show. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dig into a lot of your work with College Info Geek and some of the lessons learned there and how you grew that. But I wanted to start with before that, back in high school, when you were building websites for local businesses, because that sounds like that was kind of your introduction to this whole internet design web world. So how did that get started for you?
Yeah. So my real introduction to entrepreneurship was mowing lawns for neighbors as a kid. But I was like, from the beginning, the unique selling proposition was embedded in my brain because my mom said, don't just go out and mow lawns, offer to pick up their dog poop too. Because everyone else makes them clean up their yard before they mow. And I was like, that's smart. So I kind of brought that into web design. But the genesis of the web design thing happened in trigonometry class in 11th grade. Because I got to talking to some kid in my little 4-desk group, and somehow it was mentioned that he knew how to code. And I was like, hey, I know how to code too, because I'd just been making silly websites for bands that I liked and stuff as a kid. In fact, the first website I ever made, I made it for a band that I had never listened to because I was part of this internet forum where everyone liked this band, but I didn't really have access to their music because I didn't know about like Napster or anything at the time. I was like 12. And my dad didn't let me go to the CD store very often. So I just wanted to be part of the cool kids on that forum. And I made like the best website on the internet about this band
Nice.
at the time. And then one day I went to the CD store with my dad, finally picked it up, and I hated their music. I was like, oh, this is terrible. So that was my introduction to learning how to code, building websites. So I'm talking to this kid in my trade class. He says he knows it too. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What if we charged people money to do this? And it actually took us up until I graduated to get our first client. But during the final couple of years of high school, we worked on building our little company website. And then we went and did a competition at this club called Business Professionals of America, where we built a website for an event at their national conference. And then right after high school got out, I was still 17 and no one would hire me for a summer job. Because not 18, so that kind of cuts out a huge swath. And you're going off to college in 3 months, kid. I don't need you for just 3 months. So that cuts out everything else. I think I applied to like 30 places in my town. So I'm like, well, I can go back to my old staple and detassel corn. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, this is a very Iowa/Nebraska/Kansas thing. You essentially walk down corn rows and pull the tops off of the corn plant for like 10 hours a day. And it's super hard work, but honestly, it's like, in my mind, it's not as bad as cashiering or doing anything like where you have to work with customers.
That's fair.
So I did that all throughout my teenage years. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do that. But it's like a 2-week job. You make $1,500 if you work really hard in 2 weeks. But the rest of the summer, I was going to be twiddling my thumbs and getting ready for college. So I'm like, Ben, let's get this web design company going. And I went to my community college in my town. I wasn't a student, but I just walked into the office and I said, hey, can I go look at your job postings? And they were like, yep. They hand me this big binder and I looked through it for about an hour and I finally find a company looking for web design help. So I just called them up and I said, hey, I'm a local web designer. I just graduated from high school and I have never built a website for a client before, but I've got some of my own work. And if you guys hire me, we'll do it for pretty cheap. And they said yes. Surprisingly. So we built them a website for $350. And That included us driving to their office about 10 times and sitting with the CEO while he went line by line over the website and asked for changes like 20 times. So in terms of like ROI, it was definitely low, but it was our first project. And from there, I just ended up getting more clients from people I know, word of mouth. And, I built maybe 10 or 11 websites throughout college since then. And that was kind of the first little entrepreneurial experience online. Though I got to say, the thing that really sticks in my mind the most when it comes to web design, it's not the clients, it's not the freelance gig. What I remember that really taught me about like the power of the internet when it comes to making money, I was on some forum once, and there was this internet marketer guy who was really frustrated because he was building this site on how to stop smoking. And he's like, I can't figure out how to get these table borders to go away. And he's like, first person that can do this for me, I'll give him $20. And I'm like, I pasted the code in like 30 seconds. I was just like, border width 0. And he PayPal's me $20. And as a 18-year-old college kid, I was like, do the math on that. I just made $20 in 30 seconds. That's $40 for every second or for every minute. That's $2,440 an hour or something like that. So that was like the first thing. And man, I still remember that.
So was this the main way that you were kind of making money on the side during college? Because one of the things that you advertise on your site is that you were able to pay off $15,000 of debt before you graduated.
It was one way. But I was really like a job person for a really long time. Part of that stemmed from my fear of the finances of entrepreneurship. Like I just kind of had this false belief that if I started a business, I would immediately get audited by the IRS and the taxes were too complicated, like just run the other way. And the other thing is I went into college with a mindset, not so much to get perfect grades, but to build a resume that was so attractive that like anyone who wasn't like out of their mind would hire me. So I think I had like 6 part-time jobs in high school and then like another 6 or 7 in college. So I just like saved up a lot of money from those jobs. I did an internship at a Fortune 500 company, ended up getting a scholarship from them at the end of the internship and another scholarship from them before that internship started. Like several scholarships, several part-time jobs, saved a lot of money from all that, and then also saved money from freelance web design. And eventually, 2 years after I started College Info Geek, that started to make money as well through advertising and affiliates and speaking and stuff. So it's kind of just cobbling together cash from many different sources and then just funneling it to the debt, other than like the pittance I needed to survive.
What made you so focused on paying down the debt first?
It was really freedom. It's funny that I say it now because I have a car loan and it doesn't bother me in the slightest. But back then, I think it was really like the uncertainty of what comes after college that really drove me to make sure that I had like freedom and just as many options as possible. So the way I viewed my debt was as an option destroyer, because if I graduate and I have $15K in debt, that's going to translate to X amount of dollars per month I have to pay to the government, to Sally Mae. And whatever else my living expenses add up to, that is a higher amount of living expenses than if I didn't have debt. And that reduces my options for what I can do for a career. Maybe I want to do freelance, but I can't make enough money up front, so I got to go get a job. So in my mind, I was like, get rid of that debt because I want to do whatever I want to do. And as a blogger at the time, I don't really have this desire anymore. But at the time, I was like looking at all these people who are traveling the world, living out of one backpack, doing the whole Southeast Asia digital nomad thing. And I was like, that looks super cool, but I can't do that if I have debt. At least that was my belief. So my goal in college was pay that off as fast as possible.
Was that also part of why you wanted to live in low cost of living areas after graduating?
Actually, the main reason that I wanted to live in a low cost of living area was I wanted to stick with my friends. Before my website became profitable, I was looking at graduating and I was like, I don't really know what I'm going to do, but I think I might want to go do web development again. And my plan was to move to Minneapolis. I had friends who had moved up there. They graduated and I figured I could do that. Then the website became profitable. And around the same time, I met my girlfriend who was 2 years my junior. So I'm like, I don't want to leave her and do long distance. And I don't really want to leave my best friends who are still here. And I don't have to. So that was really the main motivation.
It's funny you mentioned the digital nomading thing too, because I think that's one of the lessons that a lot of people learn, and certainly that I learned after doing it for a year or two, is that you realize that none of these places are really any fun or any better than a place where you have a lot of close friends and relationships.
Exactly. I mean, not to like poo-poo on anybody who does the digital nomad thing, because like live the way you want to live, seriously. But one of the core philosophies I try to live by now is like go deep rather than go shallow. And I actually, I've read a lot of people who are digital nomads kind of like echo this, because they'll say, a lot of people travel and they see the tourist spots and they'll go like quote unquote do Europe in a week, which means like hopping on the train and going to 6 different countries, 1 country per day. It's like, man, I like to actually go live like a local, get an Airbnb in one of the districts of town where there's no tourists, and I go to like little cafes. I take that to another level. I'm like, well, I just want to live in a town where I know the people who are on the cafes and I have friends there and I'm not just hanging out in expat bars. So after my first few travel experiences, I was like, I really want to have a home base and then just travel every once in a while as a vacation rather than as a way of life.
Yeah, I think it's a really common realization, the desire to go deep. And it sounds like you mostly got that from traveling and seeing that you'd rather be there around your friends in hometown, or was there something else that turned you on to that?
I mean, that was the biggest thing. I really like my friends. And I mean, I did like everything I could to make sure that I could be very near my best friend. In fact, when I decided to move to Denver with my girlfriend, I was really sad because I was like, I got to go tell my best friends I'm going to move at some point. And I told them. And then my best friend was like, we've been thinking about Denver as well. I was like, yes, best thing ever. So he actually ended up living 1 floor above me in the same building, which is awesome. So we can still hang out all the time, but kind of like do new things in this new town as well. It's great. I mean, have you done the digital nomad thing? Because I know you're going to go to Southeast Asia for 6 weeks. So you're kind of still doing it.
Yeah, I'm doing a light version of it. So I was working for Sumo in Austin, and then when that ended last March, I pretty much started doing the nomad thing to an extent from there. So I was living in Paris for a month. I was living in New York for a month. I was in the like DC East Coast area for about a month and a half, and then Buenos Aires for about 4 months. And then really being there was when I realized that, okay, it's just not that fun living somewhere where you don't know anyone and don't speak the language. And you can hop into the local digital nomad community there. But, again, not to disparage it, because I think it is a really cool community, but everybody in it is the same to a certain extent, or like has very similar motivations and interests, and everyone's read kind of the same books. And so
they all read the 4-Hour Workweek.
Yeah.
They're all building an online course and they're or something like that.
And that was me too, but I don't want to just hang out with a bunch of me's, right? It gets kind of dull. And so after I was there for about 3 months, I started talking to my best friend who was living in San Francisco, and they had a room in their house opening up. And so I said, okay, you know what, screw it. I want to go back to the States and live there for a while. So I was there for 4 months, and it's like traveling is awesome, but I'd rather be either traveling or living at the home base. I think the hard thing with the nomading is that you're always in between work and travel, and then you're never really doing either.
You don't have any routines.
Exactly. You don't have your routines. Even if you're there for 2 or 3 months, you're just settling into one, and then you go somewhere else and it all changes. So it's nice to feel like, okay, here I'm working, here I'm traveling and having fun, and have that separation.
Though I do want to bring up one point, because you said this podcast is like mainly for college students, right?
Yeah, college students and recent grads.
Okay, so something I've been thinking about, and I'm going to make a video on this very soon. There's this quote from Bruce Lee. It goes, adapt what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. When I hear advice from people, what I have to ask myself every time is like, this advice is for them. Like, this is what has worked for them. And at what stage in their life did this piece of advice become useful? Because I could tell you that, like, right now, I could say, yeah, having some debt is okay, just as long as your interest rate is suitably lower than the interest rate you could get in the stock market or something like that. That makes sense for me because I've gotten to a point in my life where I don't care about that. But like 5 years ago, me would abhor that because I hated the idea of any debt whatsoever. And like 5 years ago, me would have said yes to every networking opportunity, every event, everything, because I was trying to build my network and I didn't really have an established base of connections, didn't have a whole lot of work under my belt yet. Now I do, so it's more important for me to go deep on the things I'm already established in. So if you're a college student sitting here being like, these two guys are saying digital nomading sucks, I should just go move to Cincinnati. Like, that's not necessarily the case, because digital nomading might be amazing for you for 2 months and then it might suck. Or then you might decide it's totally for you because everyone is quirky and different. So whatever people tell you, ask yourself, like, does this actually apply to my values? And at what point in time did this piece of advice become useful to this person? Like, am I actually ready for that yet? Or am I ready for the opposite?
Oh, yeah. I think that it's one of those things, too, that sometimes you have to learn it yourself. And that no matter how many times someone tells you something, until you actually experience it, then you won't, totally understand it. So I kind of knew that I would eventually have that realization with traveling, but I also knew that if I didn't go try it, I would never fully believe that that would happen, or I would never fully get it out of my system. And so it's definitely something that I think everybody should try and see, how you react to it as well. Because it is a pretty cool thing to do. And the best time to do it in your life is when you're young and most able to.
Yeah, when you have fewer obligations. I mean, meeting my girlfriend a semester before graduation probably changed things, because if I hadn't have met her, then I wouldn't have had so much tying me down to one place. I may have very well gone and traveled more, but because I'm now with her, I don't. So, everyone's got different circumstances.
Definitely. And it sounds like a big turning point for you was when College Info Geek started making money, or towards the time when you were graduating.
Yeah, it was about a little over a semester before I graduated.
How did the site start, and what did it look like the first year or two before it started being basically your full-time job?
It started because I got rejected from another site.
What was the site, if you can say?
So, yeah, there was a blog called Hack College. Started back in 2006, I think, by a couple of college guys out in California. And I found them in 2009, right when I started college, and I immediately loved it. I was like, this is the best site ever, because it's teaching me how to college better. And near the end of my freshman year, they put out this call for new writers, because they were one of those for students by students dealios, which meant that the founders were actually going to get the boot by their own rules at the end of that semester. So they needed a new class of writers. And I applied. I wrote this big, long article for them, and then sent in my LinkedIn, my resume, all that good stuff. And I didn't get the job. I don't hold it against them. I actually ended up becoming friends with most of the people who ran the site later on, but I guess I just didn't make the cut at first. But I had written this article, and I'm like, I don't want this to go to waste. And I've already been doing some like little personal blogging on the side, like a little journalistic thing. So I just thought, hey, you know what? I'm going to make my own. And it really wasn't to compete with them. It wasn't to make money. I started it because I didn't want to waste my article. I hate wasting work. And I figured with a blog, I can write whenever I want. It's not like a huge commitment. And whatever I do produce, I can show to employers and maybe get hired. Because I knew in my head, like, I don't know WordPress. I don't know how to customize all the code behind it. I don't know all the graphic design stuff. Like, there's a lot of learning opportunities here. And I'll become a better communicator regardless of what happens, because I'll be writing more. So really, it was just kind of a personal project. Early on, I actually brought on a partner because he asked me for some help on his own blog. And I'm like, well, why don't you just merge blogs with me? So he was part of it for maybe 8 months, but his interests were basically limited to Android and Linux. So like for the first year, the blog was like half college tips, half Android Linux tips. And then he ended up moving on to go do more Android Linux stuff. So it was just me for a while. And then the real first big break came about a year after I started. I put up this fun little post about how to build a desk that hangs from your loft bed. And I did this because I was home for the summer and I was very spoiled by my big, huge desk that came with my dorm. And I was like, I don't want to go back to my old high school desk. The thing's a piece of crap from Goodwill. It's like half the size. So I'm like, how do I get a huge work area where I can put my dual monitors and everything? Well, I don't want to buy a gigantic desk, but I do have this loft bed. What if? So I go to Home Depot, buy like a huge piece of MDF, some chains, like drill really crappy holes through it because I didn't really have like a good boring attachment. So I just took the drill bits and drilled like 4 holes and then just knocked the middle out with a hammer pretty much. Then fed the chain through there, hung the deal up, and I took pictures of the whole process, put it online, and Lifehacker picked it up. So like overnight, 4,000 views or visits or whatever, and some of them stuck. So that was kind of like the first little light bulb in my head, like this could be a thing. There wasn't really a money thing yet, but it was like, I want to grow this. So after that, I basically let anybody who wanted to write become part of the team for a short period of time. Slowly realized that most of them just liked the idea of being a blogger and not the actual act of writing, which is hard. So eventually I ended up just being me again. And as the years went on, I added the podcast, added the YouTube channel, and now we've got 4 people on the team. But yeah, there's lots of different phases.
What was the first piece of it that you added where it started being revenue generating for you?
First piece was Amazon affiliates, as everyone does. Actually, I just started adding things. I was like, hey, I know how to build a website. I can do hosting. Hey, I know like textbooks are big for college students. I can do textbook affiliate programs, and just like everything I could think of. And eventually that all added up. And then I started speaking, and eventually I wrote the book that was free at first, and then sold that on Amazon as a print book. And I've just sort of cobbled together multiple income sources over the years.
What had the biggest impact on it growing to the size that it is now? Do you remember there being like a specific turning point or something you started doing differently that really affected its growth?
I can point to certain catalysts like the life hacker thing, but really I think what it was a commitment to quality and depth on the articles, and a commitment to getting 1% better each time, combined with consistency and with building relationships. And like, I think these are the 3 things that everyone will tell you. They're like the non-sexy, like these aren't really hacks. You're just disguising the work hard advice. But really, that's what it is. Like, you meet people, you get yourself out there, and you constantly try to get better, because every time you do that, you are exposing yourself to like potential lucky opportunities. Like, nobody who doesn't do anything ever gets lucky, except for like lottery winners, I guess. But, you look at somebody who's got a big audience or successful, and you can be like, well, they're just lucky because they met X person, or they went to this event and this happened. But it's like, if they would have gone to that event without anything to show, or without like a ton of work and experience under their belts, like it wouldn't have happened. So the work and just the constant publishing kind of like puts you in a position to be able to take advantage of an opportunity like that. So I think like it was really just that, like continually getting ideas, trying to make things better, trying new things. And, and then like several times along the line, there's like these little mini catalysts where you meet the right person, or something gets picked up on Reddit or Hacker News or what have you.
Was adding in the podcast and the YouTube channel a big accelerator for you as well? How has that changed things?
The YouTube channel was the biggest thing by far. The podcast never really grew the whole brand like in a significant way, but the podcast taught me how to speak better and communicate better. It helped me meet a ton of people, because at first my podcast was mainly an interview show. So I met tons of new people from that. The other podcast I'm a part of now, Listen Money Matters, I'm a co-host on that show because I interviewed the original co-hosts on my podcast. So that really expanded my network, made me a better communicator, and laid a lot of the foundations for being able to edit video the way I do. But then YouTube was the big thing. And I think the 3 things that really set me up for success on YouTube is, number 1, I didn't realize this before, but it should have been obvious in hindsight. There are more kids who want to know how to study better and how to get better grades on YouTube than there are on blogs. Like, that YouTube is just like a big concentrated audience. It's got a recommendation engine. You don't have that so much with a blog. So you're kind of fighting an uphill battle when you're just trying to publish stuff out, on your own little blog. And obviously it's tough on YouTube too, but there was more people there. Another thing is, because I love video games and anime and TV shows and nerdy stuff so much, I would naturally just kind of fuse that into my content without realizing that a lot of the kids who are trying to get better grades are also into that stuff. So kind of like serendipitously, my content ended up being more interesting than what was already on there, because at the time, at least, what was on there was like a camera in the back of a classroom with a professor talking for an hour, or something like high quality shot with a good lens and a mic, but it's like some university administrator being like, you should make sure you take notes in class with a number 2 pencil, or it's like those are the kind of things that like your teacher brings up in class and makes you watch, which is funny because now teachers make their students watch my videos. So I've become that. So there was that. There was the fact that for most of College Info Geek's history, I was, as a student, not interested in academics. I was interested in career development and entrepreneurship, personal finance, all the stuff that happens outside the classroom, because I think that's more important than what happens in the classroom. So College Info Geek reflected that. But that kind of had the effect of there being really not a whole lot of academic content on a college blog, which was like a glaring omission. So it wasn't until I was well out of college, year and a half, starting my YouTube career, when I was like, maybe I should do a video on how to take notes.
Yeah.
Maybe I should do a video on how to read a textbook. So I started doing that, started actually filling out the site with academic content, building YouTube up. And I also happened to write a book on how to get better grades as well. And I think the book was like the original reaction to, oh no, I have no academic content. I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll do it all those online entrepreneurial gurus tell me to do, and I'll have an email opt-in. I'm going to get so many signups to my MailChimp account. So I'm thinking, what should I give them? How about a 5,000 word, quick and dirty guide to how to get better grades? So I type up my bullet list in Evernote. And then I'm like, to make myself write this guide, I'm going to commit to 500 words a day. It'll be done in 10 days. But the way that I tend to work is like, I won't split my 500 words up between bullet points to like flesh each one out individually. I'll just take one little bullet point and write 500 words or 1,000 or 2,000 or however much comes to mind. And my outline had many, many bullet points on it. So what I ended up with was a 27,000 word full book. And, I had committed to making that thing a free opt-in. So I didn't renege on that. I just made it free. And like the combination of that, making that call to action at the end of my YouTube videos, had the dual effect of building my email list very quickly at the same time as the YouTube channel was coming up.
Probably ended up being a good thing that you went so in depth and made it so valuable, because for anyone listening, the super short PDFs as email opt-ins are so overdone and everyone's so tired of them. But when you can say that you're actually giving away a whole book, right? Much different story.
And I mean, I can tell you what, like the aftermath of that. Well, not really. I mean, it's still ongoing, but the book has been downloaded over 150,000 times in the free version. And like, so about a year after I made it and released it, people were like, we want a print version. And I deliberated over this for so long, and it gave me so much stress, because I was like, okay, I can make a print version. I can do CreateSpace. I understand that. But if it's going to be on Amazon, like it might as well have a Kindle version. Otherwise, people are going to find it naturally on Amazon, not knowing who I am, and they'll be disappointed that they can't get it in Kindle. But then I was caught in this quandary, like, you have to sell it on Amazon. You can't make it free. It must be 99 cents or more. You can make it free for maybe like a week or so, but there is no permanent free option.
You can actually make it free on Kindle.
Forever?
Yeah, forever.
Okay, maybe that's new. I think back when I did it, you couldn't do it. I found like some FAQ page being like, you can do a limited time promotion. And I was like, well, people are going to pay 99 cents for it and then hate me because they'll find out it's free elsewhere. That never happened. Not once. All the reviews are just like, I bought this, and it's free on his site, but you know what? It's been useful, so I don't care that I paid $1 for it. And now like the print version sells pretty well, and it's on its way to becoming like the highest reviewed study skills book on Amazon in total. And like professors are buying it for their classes. So it's been very interesting. Like I was like, I wrote this full book. I'm making it free. Am I leaving money on the table? No, I'm actually not. I might have been leaving money on the table by selling it in the first place, because I don't know if it would have ever gotten the critical mass needed to make people want to buy so many print copies. I don't know how many print copies it's sold, but it generally makes like between $500 and $800 a month in print, and it's like $2 royalty. So I mean, what is it, like 300 or 400 copies a month? It's pretty good. I think like the average book sells less than 2,000 over its lifetime. So I really think like, I don't want to say this is like the model, but there's definitely a viable model in releasing a book for free and using it to build an audience, and then selling like a print version or an audiobook version or some like enhanced version or course based on it.
Well, Charlie Hohen did the same thing with Recession Proof Graduate. He was on in an earlier episode, and his book on doing free work to get apprenticeships and internships with entrepreneurs, he had it for free on his site for a long time as an email download. And that one as well, well over 100,000 people had gotten it. And then he made an Amazon version of it, was selling it there. But you could still always go and just Google Recession Proof Graduate PDF and find it on his site, get it for free. And I asked him about it once. I was like, hey, you know that anyone can get this for free, right? And he said, yeah, it's been good for promoting it, and I just want the information out there, and so I'm happy to give that opportunity to people.
And the other thing, like, you realize, even if you don't provide your book for free, people can still get it for free.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw that someone had pirated my book, and I was like, that's cool. I think that you should just like tell yourself you've made it. In fact, actually, one person, I think they were from a different country and didn't really understand the legality of pirating, because they tweeted me and they were like, hey, bro, just want to let you know, I just put your book up on BitTorrent to help more students get it.
Hey, you're giving it away for free. You want this,
I
right?
appreciate the sentiment, but it's already free on my site, and I get their email if they get it there.
Yeah. Too funny. What made you care so much about helping college students do better in and out of school and all of these topics?
The initial motivation was I just wanted to share what was helping me, because I was like really appreciative of the Hack College people like sharing what was helping them. And I was like, I just want to do more of that. And I just like sharing stuff that I do. Like, if you dig into my web history, you'll find comments of me like pasting random, like, oh, this WordPress plugin has a bug, but if you put this code snippet in there, it'll help. Just like on a random gist somewhere. It's because I like sharing stuff I find out. And then one of the things that kind of made it more meaningful to me is when I read the book Debt Free You by a guy named Zach Bissonette. I think it's a great book for any student to read. That really opened my eyes to just how bad the student debt crisis is. So that became a big motivation for me. Is like, I graduated debt free, and while not every student is going to be able to do that, I really want to educate people on what they're actually getting for their education, what their options are, and like what the value is of, like, say, like a private school versus a public school, or an Ivy League versus a state school or something like that, or not going to college at all. Because I just see so many students graduating with debt that they don't need, that didn't really get them anything. And they have the ability to get themselves to that point without paying for a product, which, I mean, I've started viewing university as like, it's an education, but it's also a product that is marketed very well and ingrained in our society. So that was a big motivation. And then when the YouTube channel started, that's when the audience really started to change and morph. And to be honest, like, the name at College Info Geek is like not accurate in the slightest anymore. I can't really change the domain because there's all sorts of associated headaches and 301 redirects and just the worst thing ever. But if you look at my YouTube channel, I'm Thomas Frank there. The header is still College Info Geek, because the only reason it's still that is because I'm like wanting someone to create some like really cool illustrated like thing where I'm a ninja or something. I don't know. But I don't want to change it to something boring. So it's still there. But like, all the rest of the College Info Geek branding has been removed from my YouTube channel. And that's because initially the audience started getting down to high school students, middle school students. I'll have people who are like, I'm 7 years old. Thank you for this video. And people will ask like, hey, do these tips work for high school students? And I have an intuitive understanding of like college is not that different from high school in terms of like how you learn. Memories are still formed the same way. You still have the good study tactics, bad study tactics. So it's like, this isn't for college students. This is for if you want to learn. And then as I've gotten older, I realized like I can't just continue to make content for only school, because I'm interested in like, how do our brains work? How do we sleep better? How do we become more healthy? So my channel is really just like become productivity and like, I hate the word self-development because it's too overused, but then, I mean, that's kind of what it is at this point. And then there's just like this college branded site behind it.
So do you think that at some point you would transition entirely away from the college, high school related stuff and move into new territory? Or do you think that'll always be a big part of it?
I honestly don't know. I think College Info Geek, the business, will always be student focused. I see my YouTube channel, because it is branded personally around me, as having the flexibility to support that business while also being able to branch out. But I actually had a big conversation with my girlfriend about this last night. If you were to ask me, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I have no clue. Like, there are some qualities, maybe. I want to be free to make my own choices. I want to be financially independent. Obviously I want to be healthy and athletic. But in terms of specific work that I'm doing, I have no clue. Because 5 years ago, I was a network engineer intern. And now I'm a YouTuber, and I remember 2 years ago thinking like, man, I'm a blogger now. That's something my network engineer age person would not have anticipated. And now, like as a professional YouTuber, that's something that my blogger personality would have never anticipated because I didn't like being on camera at first. So my main philosophy is like find things that are interesting and challenging and push you to learn that you have, you find some meaning in. And I can't look far enough ahead to predict even 5 years in the future of what that will be.
Well, I feel like anybody who thinks they can predict that with some accuracy is you have to be undershooting yourself, right? Because if it's a purely predictable future, then there's probably no really big, exciting changes happening, right? Like there's no way you could have predicted the YouTube channel taking off or the book doing extremely well. And those have probably been big pivotal moments for you.
I think you could have some things like, Gary Vee wants to buy the jets like that. That's suitably ambitious. Or Elon Musk wants to get humanity to Mars, or like, or somebody who wants to like, they know they want to be a dad someday. Just because I don't really have those ambitions and I look at the world in a different way doesn't mean it's wrong to look at the world that way. It just is like, that's how I am.
Yeah, I suppose with the career stuff, it's maybe harder sometimes, especially when you're early on and like experimenting and playing around. And to what you said, there is so much value in experimenting and trying this new stuff like the YouTube and podcast and seeing what sticks and what you actually enjoy doing.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, even though I don't have like 10-year plans or 5-year plans, I do know the value of going deep and sticking with something for long enough to see it have a return. And that's something that's very tough to figure out in college because you don't really have that base of experience built yet. So you're constantly stuck between this question of like, am I just like surface level on everything? Am I letting things go because I've gotten past the honeymoon stage and I'm just like not willing to put in enough work to see if it goes anywhere? Or is this truly not for me? It's tough to answer that question, really is. I don't think I can give any sort of like number of days or hours worth of work you should put into something. All I can say is like in a general holistic sense, you need to put in a lot of work to see if something's worthwhile. And you're going to reach that point that they call the dip, where like the returns kind of drop off for a bit. The novelty's gone away and you're just like mired in muck and it sucks to do. But that's like the craft. You're building the skills, you're building the base of work, the body of work, and eventually the returns do come if that is indeed something that is meant for you. And I think the only way to find out if it is for you is to do that. And maybe you waste time, but you don't ever really waste time because you always pull something away from the experience. Even my years walking through cornfields or picking up dog poop instilled a work ethic. And my 3 months internship doing network engineering, hated it. But I understand how to build a network. So whenever that part comes, like when I need to build a new office or something, I know that. And I have like an intuitive understanding of computer security to the point where I'm not like getting CryptoLocker or something on my computer. Like there's always something you take away from every experience. So it's not a waste.
That's a really good point. And you never know how some of those things are going to transfer over too. Like, I did a lot of public speaking stuff in college. And now that I'm doing this podcasting stuff, I'm really, really glad I did because I think that's translated over to having at least a few fewer filler words and things like that.
Yeah, less work for your editor.
Yeah, exactly.
And hey, if you wanted to, you could go do professional speaking as an income source. That's kind of cool. It gets you travel. You get to meet new people. It's honestly a pretty cool thing. I've decided that I don't really want to do it right now, at least in a professional sense. I do like speaking at conferences, but for a while I was like, maybe part of my business will be speaking to companies and schools and stuff. Like that's pretty good money. But I've realized I like to create things that last, like videos and games in the future or something like, and speaking just, I don't know, like I love being on stage, but everything surrounding a speaking event, I like don't like the travel for just like one night usually. And like the prepping and everything. Just like, I'd rather be doing some cool video thing.
Because it's going to be a similar amount of prep for a really good video or for a really good speech. But with the video, it's something that you have a bit more creative control over and that you can keep promoting for years as opposed to this one event.
Yeah, it just, again, this could be just a reflection of my point in time in my journey. Like right now, there are a huge video project going on and then the weekly content and 2 podcasts. Not, like I said, maybe we talked about this in pre-episode chat, but you can get so mired in consistent output every single week that you have no more space to tinker. So that could be part of it. I'm just like, I don't want to speak because I already have too much going on. It's possible that's that.
What do you think are maybe the 2 to 3 biggest misconceptions that you see students having in high school and college, either around their education or career opportunities postgraduate?
Good question. These questions are always tough for me because I don't know, maybe you have this too. I will view everything as obvious after I learn it. So like it seems like, oh, if I shared that, no one would care. But then like I'll make a YouTube video being like, hey, you should not just look over the PowerPoint slides to study. You should quiz yourself. And they're like, whoa, I never thought about that. It seems obvious to me, but it's because there's, you have that solidified base of knowledge that tells you that, yeah, it's obvious, but not everyone has that. So with a question like this, I am unsure of whether I should say like the obvious things to me, which are, college isn't all that different than high school, other than the fact that it's on you to discipline yourself. And there's fewer structures. Like there's no parents anymore to look at your report card. So it's all about building self-discipline, an organizational system that keeps you on task, or like the really obvious one that everyone in our space will talk about. If you are just getting your in-class experience and you're not getting out-of-class experience, like you're not prepared for the real world. So those things, are those super obvious? And do I go for something a little more nuanced? I'm not sure.
What would the more nuanced one be?
I think I would need more context. I'm really bad at coming up with like lists. Like I did an interview at FinCon last year with somebody and they were like, give us 5 of your best pieces of advice. And I'm like, context. Give me context. I have no idea. Otherwise I'm going to be like, continue breathing, maybe try to sleep, talk to people every once in a while, don't go to space without a space helmet. I can't think of any better pieces of advice than that. Maybe don't jump into a volcano, But when I get a good contextual question or somebody gives me a problem that they're having, that's when it's like, bam, I know exactly what to tell you as long as I have the experience for it.
Okay, so what if we said, if a college student came to you and they said, hey, I'm also studying management info systems or something related, working in networks. I'd much rather try to do my own kind of work, maybe like you did, or maybe, completely unrelated, but just go down that path of starting to be able to eat what they kill, make money on their own, start to, whether that's freelancing or consulting or side gigs, where would you tell them to get started and look first?
That was perfect. That's the context I'm looking for. I can tell you what I did. It was just experimenting and trying things out. It was blogging. It was like, hey, maybe I can do freelance web design. Let's go try it. I think that's the biggest thing. Like if you want to branch out on your own, you have to have either side projects or you have to go find clients. And you just have to just make small steps because you've got some skills already that you've built up through your internships or your on-campus work or your classes. Or if you're professional already, you've got time on the job. You've built up some skills. So whatever you're going to do is probably going to stem somewhat from that skill base you've built through all of your formal work and your classwork, or maybe from something that you've been building on the side. So in my case, I was management information systems major, had zero to do with web development. Like the only coding we did in that entire major was Java. But I was building websites on the side for fun. So my freelance web dev business stemmed from that. And then my ability to build a good looking blog stemmed from that. And actually I ended up getting a part-time job on campus doing web development. But that stemmed from my freelance experience and my tinkering experience. So you have to tinker. You have to maybe go try to find a client if you're going to do freelance or something like that. And then go meet people who are doing what you want to do. The simplest, easiest thing is to start a Twitter account and follow the people who you admire and then share their stuff and reply to them and kind of get on their radar and eventually maybe reach out and ask them questions, all the way up to skipping a test, paying $600 to fly to Austin, Texas on a week's notice to go to a conference that somebody just tweeted you about, which I did in my senior year. And that was super valuable to me. I met a ton of people. I met one of the guys who runs Treehouse and they were like, hey, you want to build iPhone apps? Well, we have a course on that. And I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for. I was doing an independent study on how to build iPhone apps. And I had bought this really crappy book from Barnes & Noble and didn't like it. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to fly down to this conference in Austin because the conference was all about just doing work. It was like the opposite of a startup weekend. It was called Finish Up Weekend. And it's just like, are you a creative person who has a project you haven't finished yet? Come to this cool co-working place. We're all just going to sit there for like 54 hours straight, no sleep, and finish crap. And I'm like, that's perfect. So I flew down there with the intention of going through that entire iPhone book. And then I met the guy from Treehouse. He's like, hey, you're one of the scholarship winners from Treehouse. And I was like, I forgot about that. I have a free membership. And he's like, cool, log in and take our iPhone class. And I did. And I built 2 apps in that weekend. And I went and got an A on my independent project and like literally put those 3 days worth of effort into the whole class and no more, pretty much. But I mean, that to, make a long story short, that experience also helps me meet a bunch of people, and I made more connections, went to the second conference the next year. And that's just one of those instances where you go out and you meet people and cool things happen from there.
How did you learn how to do the web design in the beginning in order to get these clients? Was it just from messing around in high school, or were there any particularly useful resources that helped you learn and get better at it?
First thing was Yahoo GeoCities. Oh yeah, drag and drop builder. Pick your template. Obviously, you're going to do the one with the cool code numbers in the back with the black background. And that was that band website I made, which was the best website for that band on the internet at the time, because I went to all the other ones and collected like everything they had. And then mine basically like filled in all the gaps that theirs had missing. So like some wouldn't have the lyrics to one album, or some wouldn't have very many pictures of the band. Mine had everything. And then of course I hated the band's music.
The good old days of early 2000 web design.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And I wish my website was still up. I think there's some GeoCities archiver site that has like the little splash page I made for all my little web projects, but the actual band site is just gone, and I'm sad about that. But so that was drag and drop with GeoCities. And eventually I started wanting to do more, and I found CodeMonkey. And I have no idea if CodeMonkey's still online, but that's how I learned HTML and CSS. And then I went and got the Head First books at Barnes & Noble, and I trucked through those and all sorts of stuff. I just kind of cobbled together a web development education from many different sources. And that's kind of how I do everything. I am currently going through a game development course on Udemy right now, but like the way I learned After Effects was not really through course learning at all. It was just, hey, I saw this cool swoosh pan in this movie I watched yesterday. How do I do that? And then I try it in Premiere, and it's like, well, there's a hard line there. There's no motion blur. And then it's like, well, you got to use After Effects, and you got to click this little 3-circle icon to get motion blur. And then you got to check a little box on your layer, and it's all from YouTube tutorials. So bam, now I know how to do motion blur in After Effects. Now I know how to do keyframing just from like Adobe's docs or somebody's random blog posts or forums. So if you have enough of an interest in a subject, I think that you will find sources, and it won't be clean. It'll be messy. You'll forget where half of them are, but you'll sort of cobble together knowledge. I can say for web development in general, like Codecademy is very good. Like Stack Exchange is a great place to ask questions. And then Treehouse is also very good as well. I like Treehouse because they do video courses, but then there's also coding challenges. And then like Codecademy is that without the videos, pretty much.
Right. Codecademy is a little less personal. Treehouse, you get to see the people you're talking to.
And with anything, like you have to take a little bit of the importance off of the course and put it onto just mucking about and building things, because that's where you really build those like solidified neural connections of how to solve problems and how to use the tools you're learning, is when you put them into practice, and not in just like a write hello world little practice scenario. It's like, no, you got to really build your own website. I think like the most significant coding challenge I ever took on that taught me the most is a senior project I did where I tried to build a web app that would like email your mom something really offensive if you didn't get up on time. So I had to build a login system, a user database. I had to build like cron jobs that would send the email at a certain time. I had to build an email sender application and like a user dashboard and stats and all that kind of stuff. And it was hard, and my code sucks, and I didn't know that you have to close your database connections. So by the time I presented it in front of the class, like I had opened so many database connections that my web server crashed right when I went up to the class, so I couldn't even show off the project. I was like, trust me, it works usually, but I can't get on my web hosting support fast enough for them to reset MySQL. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, that's how you learn in the most intense way.
Is there anything that you wish you had learned sooner in life?
I'm not really one of those people who looks back too much, but the example that always comes to mind when this question is asked is I would start networking sooner. And networking is not the greatest word, but for the first few months or year of blogging, I just kind of wrote on my own, and I wasn't really actively reaching out to other people that much. And I still am not always the best at this. I get caught up in my own projects. I've got a list of people that I'd like to reach out to. Haven't done it yet, but cool shit happens when you reach out to people. especially when they have similar interests and values.
I think that's been my favorite thing about doing this podcast is having a really good excuse to reach out to people like yourself and get to come on and have these conversations.
Yeah, it's a wonderful excuse. And I don't know if you've done this yet, but like a really good way to get big guests is to wait for when they have a book coming out, because then they're just like looking for as much publicity as they can get. So when I was like super cockroach mode at the beginning, I got I remember the first one was Dan Schawbel, who has like a personal branding website. And I was a big fan of his in college. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I know this is probably a long shot, but I'm this college student and I have a podcast for students. It gets like 50 downloads per episode or something like that. And he's like, yeah, I'll come on the show as long as I can plug my new book that's coming out. And I didn't know he had a book coming out. I just reached out to him cold. And that was kind of like the little flip or the little switch that flipped in my head. I was like, oh, think about it from their perspective. What can they get out of it? And that helps.
Definitely. Speaking of books, is there any particular book that you would definitely want to give to the incoming freshmen or graduating seniors of your college?
I have a whole books page on my website.
That's true. We'll link to that.
Yeah, you can link to it because I don't know the URL off the top of my head. It's like essential books for students. The two that come to mind, there's a bunch that come to mind, but the Cal Newport books, So Good They Can't Ignore You, is a really great career development book, especially for the college student or the recent graduate who gets into their career and realizes they don't like it, because it's worth it to read the book, but I can kind of boil down the most important thing right now for you, which is that you have to branch out gradually from your base of skills. You can't be the Wall Street day trader who goes and starts a yoga studio because you don't have the right skill base or connections for that. But if you're a day trader and you're like, I could move into financial computer security or something because I have a financial background. Like there's always this adjacent area to what you're doing, and that's where you're most likely to be successful. So that's what I've always done. I mapped, actually for a speech I did at Luther College, I mapped out my entire career progression because I wanted to show the students exactly how it had happened. And I was like, I drew these lines and I had these dotted offshoots for side projects, and some of them looped back into the main line eventually. But it's like, IT, how do you get from IT to YouTuber? Well, there's a side project of a blog over here, then a podcast that helps with speaking, and then YouTubing and some video projects in college. Like it all kind of urges in, but there's always like a base and a history that allows you to do what you do. So if you're sitting there being like, I don't really like the path I'm on, look for what is adjacent to that path or to some other base of skill you have. And then deep work was very useful for me because as an entrepreneur, and you'll probably agree with this too, there's no boss breathing down your neck. So all the motivation to do your work comes from you. And when you're dealing with social media and all the distractions and possibilities that you have in front of you, it's very tough to really buckle down and just do it. So I found that book very useful. And I think that most students deal with the same problem that entrepreneurs deal with, where you have a bit of structure, but there's no boss. There's no mom or dad or, manager coming in and saying, hey, is that done? You have due dates maybe, but a lot of times your due date is an exam at the end of the semester. And when it's that far in the future, you got to set up your own milestones and your own systems, and you have to build the mental discipline to do the work. I was just going to say, if anyone else is curious about other books, I've got them listed out, but I won't overwhelm you.
No, I was just going to second the recommendation for both of them. But deep work in particularly, I think, has been a great heuristic for me with scheduling and work in terms of saying, okay, am I actually doing deep work right now? Or am I derping around on other stuff that I should be just not doing or outsourcing? Or, we were talking about editing beforehand, right? That's a good example of actually putting your time on your deepest, most important work and not getting sidetracked by everything else.
Yes, exactly.
Are there any last thoughts or pieces of advice that you wanted to leave these listeners with? Things that have been maybe particularly impactful for your audience?
One thing I always think about, I actually said this on another podcast. There's like this quote about limitations from this book called the I Ching, which is like from the 8th century BC in China. And I can't find the quote right now, but this is something that I think I'm going to put up on my wall soon. And the gist of it is like, man can do nothing without limitations. Because without limitations, he'll be lost in the boundless. Within the structure of limitations, he gets focused and he can do something. And that's a far less eloquent version of the actual quote. I need to put it on my wall so I can read it. But man, I think about this so much because we all get like so much FOMO, like fear of missing out. And there's so many opportunities and there's all kinds of stuff. And it can get really tough to figure out like, what do I actually care about doing? do I have enough time to really go deep on something that I do care about? And I think when you do embrace limitations, either building a publishing schedule for yourself or setting up like a study area in your room where you don't do anything else except study, when you create these structures for yourself, you take the burden off of your limited willpower reserves and your limited amount of discipline, which varies throughout the day based on your sleep and your nutrition, your mood and everything. And you're more able to focus because there are some external supports and structures, even if they take the form of limitations that box you in a bit. That's good.
And even if it might not feel good at first.
Yeah, absolutely. And things that piss you off, sometimes those are good for you. If nothing pisses you off, then you get apathetic sometimes.
No, I mean, that's definitely true. It's something I fought for a long time with the blog, but then with this podcast and everything, it's like having to impose that structure has, I think, made everything a lot better and more productive.
Yeah, exactly. I think of everything in terms of a pendulum. It's always swinging back and forth. This is actually a very good mental model for me. Pendulum that is constantly moving, because I think we're always seeking balance in everything we do. We're just like, man, if I could just be a little less busy, I wouldn't be so stressed. Or man, if I could just have something a little more satisfying to work on, I wouldn't be so bored with my life. And you know what? Eventually you're going to get there, but then the pendulum is going to swing and you're going to have too much going on, or you're going to be too bored. And once I accepted that there will never be a perfect harmony that I achieve forever, that was very freeing. Because I know that like there's always going to be struggles, because I can't predict what's going to come up and I can't predict what my weird little brain is going to want to do next week. So I'm just going to try to get better, an overall trend line of improvement. But I know there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be swings back and forth, and that's okay.
I love that. And I think that's a fantastic note for us to go ahead and wrap up on.
Sweet.
Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. For people who want to find your YouTube channel, site, Twitter, everything, where should they go? YouTube.com/Thomas Frank. I feel like a bad internet marketer for not sending people to my home base, but YouTube is the big thing, and my about page on that channel has everything else. So great.
Check it out there.
Yeah, we'll link to that and everything else in the show notes. And thank you so much again, Thomas. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nat.
Have a good one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Nat Chat. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to Nat Chat in iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Second, if you're trying to take advantage of some of the information from this episode, be sure you check out the show notes at nateliason, nateliason.com/podcast, and find a friend, because implementing a lot of this stuff is much easier if you have somebody to do it with. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying other episodes of the podcast, please leave it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your casts, so that more people can find it. This is the best way for it to get some more exposure and to make sure that I can keep bringing these episodes to you. With that, thank you and have an awesome rest of your day.